Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to another episode of our podcast today. This time, we will be discussing the trauma of being stateless, where we will explore some of the pressing, not some of the pressing, but one of the most pressing issues uh, that our global countries are facing today. It is an absolute pleasure that we are joined by Ms. Aisha Ghazi, who is a documentary filmmaker, human rights lawyer, and researcher whose work focuses on statelessness, particularly with marginalized communities. Her documentary, Chain in the Web, has been highly acclaimed piece. She's also has worked extensively with the stateless populations, including Rohingya Muslims, shedding light on the devastating effects of being without a nationality in a world that often refuses to recognize your very existence. In this episode, as I mentioned, we will explore the trauma, challenges, and the human stories of those who live in limbo, facing persecution without protection or identity. Thank you so much, Aisha ji, for joining us for the first time in our podcast. I will start off with your motivation first. Like, what initially drew you to work on this issue of statelessness within the religious minority communities, with a special focus on Rohingya Muslims? Was there a specific moment or experience that sparked your interest in this topic or in this domain? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for sharing your platform with me, Furqan. As you said, what's the specific thing that brought my focus to this issue of statelessness? Basically, my work goes around statelessness, not just statelessness, but around war and conflict. So in the times when we are, we are young, since we are young, there's not even a single moment in our life when there was no conflict going on, especially if you see the Muslim world. So everywhere, it is just around you, everywhere, the war and the conflict and the refugee crisis and the people in pain, it's just around you everywhere. So this is not something very alien that you have to go out and experience something very different to get attracted to this particular trauma of the mankind. It is all around us, and I think all of us in some ways are touched by this topic, touched by this subject. I was just fortunate enough that I got a chance to work on it. I got a chance to work with refugees around the world. And when you are talking about refugees, some of them are stateless as well, which is even more traumatic, much more than being just a refugee. At least when you're a refugee, you have at least a right over some land. But when you are stateless, you are basically nowhere. You are on the globe, but you are nowhere. So looking around the world, you look at the wars around you in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in what is happening with, Rohingya Muslims, what's happening with Syrian Muslims, what's happening with Kashmir, what's happening all around you. So this is something, that is enough motivation for anyone, not just a Muslim. Anyone who feels like a human, you should be engaged to this matter. It is a common humanity matter.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Yesterday I had an interaction with a Portuguese journalist. He also kind of linked towards his inclination because he's now specialized in writing on reporting on religious affairs. He started off with he said he's a big football fan, and plus his background in international relations. He noticed that people or a lot of stories, or a lot of content has been mainly focused on these wars, regional conflicts, and there's nobody that who's writing on religious affairs. So he, like you, stood up and said that I will, start a niche that would be focusing on the reporting on religious affairs. So you are the one who basically did the same. So thank you so much for sharing this insight. You've talked about the refugees and the trauma that they endure during or through their lifetime. So uh, do you see that the trauma of stateless, especially among population living in a majoritarian countries, and what are some of the most striking human stories you've encountered? I'm sure there must be many, very many stories that you've just encountered. from your recent tour in Bangladesh. Uh, that also illustrates the devastating effects of statelessness on these communities.
Personally, if you are talking about my personal experience, it's, to be honest, it's very hard to evaluate which community of stateless people was more traumatized than the other one, and which story is much more painful than the other one, because they are the people who are sharing the same sort of trauma. It's the same sort of trauma. For some people, it's more challenging because of their physical or family situations. For some, it is a bit less challenging because they are free from the burden of their family to take responsibility of their young children, or they are physically fit enough to cope with it. But generally, the trauma is there, no matter what the intensity is. And if you are, at the moment, the biggest population of stateless people is Rohingyas, who are sitting at the border of Bangladesh and Burma right now. There are around, at the moment, there are some 900,000 or something, some more than that, because I don't think they are going to stop, the incoming is stopped, or some of them have moved to Malaysia in the boats, and Indonesia, and the boats have been drowned. So there is no counting how many people have been drowned so far. So that is the biggest population of the stateless community. If you talk about my personal experience of any traumatic experience that I had, looking at them living in those situations is such a trauma that when I started my work, when I first went to the Rohingya refugee camps, I will be honest with you that I found, being peaceful even at my home very difficult. I could not sleep for many nights. And then I had an opportunity to go and visit the Calais camps. It was January 2015 or 16, I guess, in those times. And in January, you can imagine how cold it must be. And those people are living in France, the Syrian refugees and Iraqi refugees, and some of them were Afghan. The cold weather, and it was raining all day when we were there, all day, all night it was raining, and the plastic tents they were living in. It was so traumatizing to see the little children living in there. If I compare them to my children, how do I feel? Because just a few years ago, they were living like just like us. They were professionals. They were doing their work. The children were going to school, and suddenly a war breaks out, and they don't know where they are going to end up. It's so unpredictable for them that where they are living, what they are going to face the next day, and how long they are going to stay there. So that was the case with, obviously, the refugees in Calais, and every other day there were riots because the nationalists, so-called nationalists, who are the basic reason for this statelessness around the world. They were rioting, and obviously they are not living in their houses, they are not living in their cities. They are just living in a free patch of the land where they are cutting the jungle, and they are making their dwellings, and rather camps. Well, it can't be regarded as a dwelling. But they had no tolerance that why the aliens, the concept of aliens, the others are here. So eventually they will come, and they will take up our resources, our employment, and so many insecurities that they are having. So that was the kind of insecurity when they were with the people who are living in the camps as refugees. And the insecurity stays. No matter how long you have been a refugee, the insecurity stays with you. Like, I had an experience to work with Palestinian refugees in Jordan. They had been there it's their third generation there, right? When they started living there in 1948, that was the first exodus from Palestine. And I could find some people who came as a very small child in 1948. So since then, it's their third generation, right? So they started their life in canvas campus, in camps, tents, small tents, and now they have been taken over by the brick camps, but the vulnerability is still the same. The people who are, you don't have a right. If you don't have a right over the land, it doesn't matter how long you have been living somewhere. And that is the biggest trauma with any refugee community, with any stateless community, that they don't know, and they don't see any hope that how long they are going to stay there, what's going to be the case with their next generation, even for themselves, how are they going to end up, towards the end of life. You are more vulnerable when you are getting old, and you see life very differently. So the whole old population of refugees, they have a different sort of trauma, and the young generation has a different sort of trauma. So there are layers after layers and layers of trauma that these people go through. But because we don't focus on it, because we don't zoom in their lives, we just, we just put everything in one term, and that is stateless and refugees, and it definitely it brings down the intensity of the trauma very, very low. It's just stateless, refugee, and that's it. And because we are used to these names, especially in recent times, when we grew up, we saw so many refugees, so many, half the population of Syrian refugees. Half the Syria is empty because half the population is refugees now, and we see so many Afghan refugees, and we saw so many internally displaced people due to the war on terror, and then Iraq, and then name anything, and then African subcontinent, and then there are Bosnians, and there, just name anything. So for us, it's just a normal thing. But if you zoom in, it's not a normal thing for the people who are going through it. So all this, that is all, the stories, they collectively touch my heart.
These are some of the spine-chilling stories and some of the horrific traumas that you've described. Talk about their lived experience. I'll switch to another question that talks about their daily lives in these camps. You've slightly given us an idea of how they live in the during the cold weather. So how do they do it in the absence of official state recognition or protection, which basically increases their vulnerability?
Look, number one, there is no respect for life, right? Human rights, any definition of human rights, any definition of convention, any definition of UN Charter, everything. The first right is right to life, right? And there is no respect for life. They are so vulnerable, anybody can attack them anytime. Not just individuals, obviously, the group of people. As I spoke about the vulnerability of people sitting in Calais. So that was the case with every other community. And if we specifically talk about the Biharis, the stateless population living in Bangladesh, they are obviously more than 300,000, more than that. So look at the vulnerability of the people. They are the people who had been massacred just 50 years ago, right? And so far, there is no recognition for there's no international official recognition for what they have been through. That was no less than a genocide, but there is no recognition for it. Nobody talks about it. It's not in any international conscious that this is what happened in our times. And then those people had to live with the people who basically killed them in masses. So just look at the vulnerability and the value of life. There's no value of life for them. And the next thing is there is no job opportunity. There is no opportunity to earn. So how would you survive? How would you survive? Because that is the unless you are being given by some UN, this and that agencies, some monthly stipend, or you are being given everything that you need, and you are providing housing, you are provided housing, and you are provided with the educational facilities. This is not the case, and nobody can do it, even if UN claims, even if some NGOs claim that they are doing this and that and that. Look at the number of population, look at the percentage of population, and look what you are doing. You are not doing anything remarkable. So if you have no opportunity, obviously you don't have any right over the employment of opportunities of the state you are living in, because you are stateless, right? That is the first level of vulnerability. So what people do, they are used as the cheapest labor possible, because people know they don't have any right and they have to survive, so they will work for anything you offer. So that is the first level of their vulnerability. Highly vulnerable people, young people, women, children, even children. Anybody can exploit them economically, physically. And the next level comes, it is something very, very remarkable, that when you are a stateless person, you don't have any right over justice system of the state. If you are being wronged, if you are being murdered, if you are being looted, if you are being exploited in any way, you have no justice system. You can't just go and say that, look, this is happening with me and there are my rights, because you don't have any rights, because you are termed as stateless. And for me, to be honest, the concept of statelessness, it itself is it's a big injustice to the humankind. This world belongs to us all. How can some people be stateless and some people can declare them stateless? And how does it work? I don't understand how does it work, and why does it work? Why does it work? So anything you do for them, they are still vulnerable, because they don't have any right, you say right, over anything. If they are wrong, nobody is come to rescue them. Nobody is going to provide them justice because they know there is no state backing them. It is just like a person who doesn't belong to any family, and he is just living on the streets. That is the micro level trauma that the whole population goes through. And I don't think anything can, you know, there is no solace for them. There is nothing that they can, they can be, okay with. No.
Indeed, you talk about their living experience in terms of recognition, and you talked about. I mean, there are many stories. I mean, and I'll also slightly deviate from the topic. I would request you to tell us about the current status of the Bihari communities who are living in Bangladesh. Let's say the status of repatriation, perhaps, and also, are there any successful stories that you noticed, or do you see, or did you notice, or did you cover any of those, heroes emerged from those ashes?
The Bihar is the topic. Seriously, it's obviously very close to my heart because how I feel connected to it. Look, my own family migrated in 1947 from Punjab in India, from Amritsar to this Punjab, right? And after 3 generations, I cannot even imagine that my family migrated from somewhere. And at one point of time, we were refugees for many, many months, right? And we started our life with basically zero. So if I connect myself to those communities who are there in Bangladesh right now, because they are the people who in 1947, just like us, they migrated to that side of Pakistan. We were fortunate enough to migrate to this side of Pakistan because we were refugees in Punjab and they were refugees in East Pakistan at that time. But our status was exactly the same. And if I compare myself to them, look how fortunate I am and how vulnerable the situation was, how unfortunate it could have been if I was just born on the other side of the land there. Look, we migrated in 1947. We are all settled in Pakistan, and we never felt that we do not belong to this land or this land doesn't belong to us. And look at the unfortunate situation with them. In 1947, they did the first migration. They left everything behind to be in a Muslim country in Pakistan, right? Just after 25 years, just after one generation, not even one generation, the same generation was there, and they had to go through the trauma of 71, right? And their only sin was that they supported the country they made. Basically, that's what happened. This is exactly the case. It was because they were part of the struggle. Some of them were part of the struggle, and rest of them they opted for the country to come over. And then, in after 4 years, they are required to abandon that country that they made themselves and to align their ideology and their sentiments with the linguistic or nationalistic identity, which was obviously it is a very unfair demand, to be honest. And then there is a whole population. There was a whole population of some 600,000 people or more than that. They were living there. More than that. At the time of 1947, more than that people came to that part of the land from Bihar and Assam, right? And obviously, the whole population was not involved in what happened in 1971. Most of them were just silently looking at what's happening, and they were as vulnerable as anybody else in the whole situation. But if you target a community as for your hate focus, right? If you target them that they are the vulnerable people, and you can have a vengeance, you can have your hatred focused to them because they are vulnerable, they are weak, they cannot defend themselves, they are minority, they are a very small minority. There were just 2% Urdu speaking people in East Pakistan before 1971. So if you focus 98% focuses their hate towards 2%, I would not blame 98% because 98% were not focusing their hate to 2%. There was just a fragment of the society who was targeting them. Just imagine, what they have gone through. They are already refugees. They have left everything in Bihar and Assam and left behind in India. And then there is another challenge for them that they are not being accepted in the state where they chose for themselves, where they were welcomed, obviously. So this is what happened with them. They were the target of hate. And unfortunately, things didn't change in the last 50 years. The intensity of hate that was offered to them that time 50 years ago by a small community of hate mongers, by the narrow nationalists, it is still the same. It is a very traumatic experience for me to go there and witness what actually is happening on the ground, because so far, especially during the Hasina regime, there was no, as such, that we were not welcomed in there. We could not really go there and see what was happening. So it was a closed door case for us for a long time. Now, when the things changed and I went there myself, it was so traumatizing to see people, that the people who had been, well off and wealthy, or at least comfortable, just 2 generations ago, like 50 years ago, now they are living in slums. And slums, you cannot imagine the kind of slums they are living in. I haven't seen things like that, to be honest. It is just one room, maybe 9 by 7 room, and that is divided in the middle because there is no more space to expand. So the same room is divided in the middle, and people are, bending down to go under the shelf to cook, and they are living on top of the shelf, using that space to sleep or do their everything life, and that's it. And there is a street in the middle of two dwellings, two homes that they call home now. Two people cannot walk through them in one time. That is the narrow space they have, and this is where they're living for last 50 years. And if you say that, okay, there are some people who say that, look, they had been given very recently, they had been given right to citizenship. We have to understand that right to citizenship is not a citizenship. Right to citizenship, they had a right to citizenship for Pakistan for last 50 years, right? And half of them could not avail it. Half of them could not avail it, although it was their right to be in Pakistan. When we talk about repatriation, we know what happened, and the funds that had been allocated for their repatriation, and they are still stuck somewhere in some bank accounts, and they had not been utilized. Because in early 70s and 80s, there was some trend for bringing them in. There were some voices for bringing them in Pakistan, because they have every right to be in there. Like me and you, we are the Pakistanis. We have every right over Pakistan. They are the same. They are the same. We are nobody to deny their right just because we are settled in the land. But in after 90s, there is a clear decline in intention to bring them back, which is, I think, a very, very big injustice. And now, very recently, what I personally witnessed, and I was personally upset about it, that there is a very silent denial of their right to be repatriated, which is not acceptable. And, no matter what, how long it goes, even if it's 100 years gap in 1971 and the current time I'm living in, their right is their right, and that's it. As a Pakistani, they have every right. And especially the kind of bias and partiality and hatred they are still going through, that is remarkable, and that is not something that should be ignored by Pakistan. I had a chance to visit some of the refugee camps, so-called refugee camps, outside Dhaka. In Dhaka, obviously, they are living in slums. The situation is drastic. But outside Dhaka, the situation is even worse. It is, I can't, I can't find words to explain how they are living. Uh, I went to a small community in Adamji area. Adamji was a big mill that was established there by West Pakistan, and obviously they provided employment to the locals and the Biharis, everyone in there. And that was at one time one of the biggest factories in the whole Asia. But what happened with the people who established that, they were all killed in the ethnic targeted massacre in 1971. And on the whole population living around the Adamji, it is a remarkable example of injustice and hatred that can be perpetrated against a community even after 50 years of a conflict. That is remarkable. Even at this time, the women were telling me their personal stories, that they're not offered job, even the minion jobs, even if they go to somebody's houses to get an employment, that I will do this, household little things, your cleaning and stuff. They are just, kicked out of houses because you are Bihari. So if they go to school, they are Bihari. You are the people who collaborated with Pakistan in 1971. So you have to carry the burden of hate, and you have to live in these circumstances, because that is your punishment. This is what they are going through. Just imagine that after 50 years, they don't have any employment, they don't have any education facilities, don't talk about health issues. Like in the camps, I hardly saw any family that didn't have any person who was going through a severe health condition. No, obviously they don't have any recourse to any medical facilities. Imagine that life, and there is no hope. at least there should be some hope that we are going to live here for this long, and then there will be some changes. There will be some time. At that time, people, maybe because of the 1947 experience, they thought that things will change in a generation's time. It didn't happen for them, and I don't see it happening very soon for them. So there is a responsibility of Bangladeshi government. Obviously, they are their citizens, because at that time they migrated to East Pakistan, and East Pakistan became Bangladesh. So they have every right to be the citizens of Bangladesh. They have every right to be considered the same people, and then they have right over Pakistan. They have right over two countries, right? If we even don't talk about India, where they migrated from in 1947, forget about India. But they have a right over two countries, and both the countries are there, right? They're both the countries are existing. But even in that situation, if they are called as stateless people with no rights on either of the country, it is it is remarkable. I would say, the least I would say, it's remarkable.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and it's also staggering in a way that they have been enduring so much of a trauma. I was before this podcast, I was looking at some of these stats. There was some incidents of repatriation took place, right? By the mid of 1972, right? It started off. I'm sorry, Pakistan basically accepted 83 Biharis, right? I guess after 1971, and by 1974, the number increased by 108,000, and they have been transferred to Pakistan. Like till I guess something changed around during the period of after 1988, right? When
Even in
the
1993,
process,
people brought
yeah,
in.
yeah, the process of repatriation got like affected. Uh, you've comprehensively highlighted that the lack of acceptance, or there's like they're being neglected, right? From the governmental side, from both the countries, especially from Bangladesh. Can you explain how the relief organizations treating them, right, and how their issues are being addressed to provide them unique needs of, especially with the minority communities that are living in these camps? Are they receiving the same amount of treatment and support, uh, even from those relief organizations, or are there any additional barriers?
Look, the things are, there are many aspects to the question you are asking. First of all, you were saying that there was a repatriation in 1974, and there was some repatriation after that. I would add that there was one full plane that landed in Pakistan in 1992 and 93 as well, and there were some homes specifically made for the Bihari refugees in certain parts of the Punjab. But it was sad in a way that it gave a lot of hope to the people who were left behind. I just went to one of the Bihari camps in there, and that's what people were telling me, that in 1990s, 1993, we were told that, look, your turn is going to come, because the 50 people from our community were taken to Pakistan in 1990s, and we sold everything because we thought, we are going. We already have we didn't have anything, and then there was a hope that, look, in 15 days, 20 days, the other plane is coming and they are going to take you all to Pakistan. So we just, whatever we had, we even left that to go to Pakistan, and then nobody turned up. So I would say the selective justice, the selective help, that is a bigger, more, it is a bit more bigger injustice than any sort of, no, than no justice. So if you give a hope, that is even more traumatic. And this is what happened to them. They were not accepted back, which was their right. And then they were not taken where they were supposed to be. And there is, as I said, there is a lot of repatriation fund that is still lurking in the bank accounts, and that is not being utilized anywhere. And then coming to your question about the NGOs, the role of NGOs, what they are doing, can they do enough? NGOs can never do enough. We have to be very clear about it. I am personally, I do not undermine anyone's work, but I'm personally very clear that NGOs are commercial entities. They do their work, but they cannot replace a state's responsibility. So they just do whatever they can do. And as I said, the selective justice, the selective help, that out of 100 people's community, if I am an NGO and I can just provide to 10 people, that is big injustice to rest of the 90 people. right? It's because that is a selective help, that is a selective justice. This is what the NGOs are doing, if they are doing anything. I don't see any big NGOs working with, if I particularly talk about Bihari refugee camps, I do not see any big NGOs working for them. They were getting some very little help that was completely stopped by 2004. It's been a good 20 years now. That was a very, very small, little help for their everyday life. And that was just, for some of the refugee camps. There are many, many refugee camps around the Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a big country. And even that help was just being given to the particular refugee camps, not to all of them. And then in 2004, it was completely stopped. And the hostility they had been going through for last 15 years or 20 years, I would say 15 years especially, no NGO would want to work there because state doesn't endorse that. State doesn't like that these people are being helped. These people are had been target of state-sponsored hatred, especially in Hasina regime, in any of Awami League regime. So why would an NGO want to work in such a vulnerable condition? And then there are some stories of some people, obviously, who claim that they are helping people in there and they are being helped from the overseas or other communities. They have limits. They have limits, and then there are some, obviously, they can't do enough. And then they maybe, when some people become, comfortable in their offices, even the NGOs, as I said, they become commercial entities when they become comfortable. They just want to do things that are around them, that's the arm's distance, that's it. So they do not want to go outside and look what's happening on ground outside their boundaries. So the vulnerability of the people outside the urban areas is a highly sensitive issue. That is the population that is at the brink of collapse in every definition, health wise, education wise, in every sense of human side. And as I said, as long as there is no support from the state, NGOs can't do anything. And anyway, it's not NGOs' responsibility, it's the responsibility of the state. NGOs can never replace states.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the responsibility and the lack of access, perhaps, or accessibility is also the issue, right? Right. Uh, I mean, if they provide access to the affected people, they must have been like, even the token access, right? That okay, these are living in quite some acceptable conditions, and then they turn their backs, right? So I totally agree how they visit, and then there are civil societies and NGOs that now have confined themselves to project based, right? Milestones after milestones. So they do work milestone basis. The issues that you're highlighting obviously had a lot of connections with the mentality or the mental health of those who are being affected. The psychological trauma they endured must have been, indescribable in the words. Those are living in limbos. From your interviews with survivors, I'm sure again there must have been very many stories within their identities. They lost their identities, right? And the trauma of being treated as invisible, the invisibilization of their state by both their home and host countries. So, can you talk about that, the psychological trauma you experienced?
Look, it is a totally different state of mind when you don't have any right over anyone. If I zoom it in and talk about an individual, how do you think the mental health of a person, of an individual, would be if he doesn't have any right over anyone? Not even a family, not even a society, not even on anyone. So, do you think that the individual can be okay mentally, in terms of mental health issues? No, it's not possible. So that is the case with every individual living in there. They know that they don't have any trauma, and they feel vulnerable because, as I said, they do not have any access to the justice system. If I don't have food, right, I can go and knock on the court that, look, the state is doing with me, and I have every right to access my basic rights. They don't have that facility. If they are being wronged, if they are being exploited, look at the exploitation of the people, look at the human trafficking from those areas. not just within the country, outside the country, the way they are being sold as forced labor. And there are many layers of this trauma that are much, I think a bit too painful to talk about if I come to the women and their vulnerability in this situation. I can't even comprehend to talk about it. But if you are grown up in that sort of vulnerability, just imagine what sort of person you would be, what the society should be expecting from you. I met some of the refugees and I was just walking through, one of the aisles in the refugee camps. It's outside the Dhaka. It's around 1.5 hour drive from Dhaka. There is a very little refugee dwelling in there. And I was just randomly stopped by a guy who was standing there and looking at who we are, for my documentary. I went there for the filming of my documentary in there. And he was looking at what we are doing, our work. And then he stopped me and he asked me, "Where are you from?" I said, because he could tell from my language that I'm from Pakistan. And he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Pakistan." And he started laughing and he said, "I can't say that because I don't belong to anyone. I don't know who I am." This is what he said. That's going to be part of my documentary as well. You can watch it there. He said, "I cannot understand who I am. Am I Indian? Am I a Bangladeshi? Am I a Pakistani? I just want to know who am I? And am I somebody? Who am I?" So when he was talking about it, so many people gathered around him and they were all saying the same thing. And I could see the trauma on their face. And I could link it with my forefathers when in 1947 they came to Pakistan. If we had to go through it, the same thing, how would I be feeling? So this is the mental health state for those people. They lack identity because they don't belong to anyone, and then they know that they are hated wherever they go, around their dwelling, to the small houses, even to any level of. I don't say that when they go to very millionaires or very rich people around Bangladesh, they are being hated like that or treated like that. Even the normal, lower class Bengalis treat them like that. People who are living around them. I don't blame all of them. I don't generalize that. But this is what they are experiencing in every day. So if you do not expect anything from life and then you have to carry the burden of life, you have to carry the burden of life, what you must be going through.
Yeah, you talk about the trauma and the pain while explaining their stories. I can also experience the same in your voice as well. The tone that you're using for them is really, telling me that your empathetic approach towards them is really remarkable, and I really regard you high in this for doing such an amazing work. We are left with three questions. I deliberately uh, skipped the intersectional part of it because you did talk about the intersection of statelessness with persecution, right? You did slightly touch upon it. Do you want me to ask this or?
No, we shouldn't.
Okay, yeah, you did that. Okay. So, like, uh, how does the experience of being stateless affect the younger ones, right? The younger generation and women in particular with these communities, especially with the health related issues that you indicated earlier. Are there any particular challenges? I'm sure there must have been many challenges in terms of education, future prospects, or even basic rights.
Look, whatever laws you make, that is something very, very different. Like India made laws um, about zimindari system. Like UN has given some um, treaties and some levels for how to treat with the prisoners of war. There is a Geneva Convention. There is a very fancy wording for the torture, that no human should go through the torture and no human should be this and that, and everybody should be provided the basics of the life according to the UN Charter and this and that, whatever laws you make. Do you see them being implemented in the world? The same UN is just there when people are being tortured in Guantanamo Bay. The same UN who gave this Charter of Human Rights and all these, Convention of Human Rights in 13, 14, 15, 16, uh, bullet points for this is have to be ensured that nobody goes to the torture, and what was happening in Abu Ghraib and what was happening in Afghanistan, and how the people were being indiscriminately killed by drone attacks and all that. All the laws were there, right? So It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's written in the books or in the legal books. That is just there to be used when the powerful people want to use it. The law around the world is just has a utilitarian purpose for the powerful people, and that is the reality. So now, what happens if even if we ensure them, look, there is some, we will make some fancy changes in our legal system, like Bangladesh declared, the court declared that they have right to citizenship. If the court gives them a right to citizenship, it does not affect the common people's sociology and psychology around them, who are going to be around them. Right. The basic thing is to address the social psychology of the people. The basic thing is to address the things that are creating that partiality. And I think the curse upon the humanity in these times, in our time, the curse upon the humanity, I would repeat that, is nationalism, is narrow nationalism, is linguistic ethnicity, right? This land belongs to us because we speak this language. Can you imagine, can you imagine that human can talk about it? No, no, the land does not belong to anyone, right? It's the right of the people to live on the piece of land they are living. Even if you are even if you are not generous enough to share a big chunk of the land, at least everybody has a right. Everybody has a right over a piece of land that he calls home, that he calls his house, right? And the linguist ethnicity, they say, no, 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 because you don't speak Bengali, because you don't speak Burmese language, because you don't speak this language and that language. We are looking at that in our own country as well. The linguistic, nationalism is being, it is being sponsored to be popular. But that is the worst thing a human can offer to another human. That is the worst state of mind a human can live in, to be honest. And that is the root cause of all that is happening there. Even if you change many laws, for example, in Bangladesh, for example, in Burma for Rohingya refugees, or anywhere in so many other countries there are so many, obviously, there is a long list of stateless people. It is the attitude of the people that has to be changed, that has to be addressed. And that is not being changed because states are sponsoring the hatred in some ways, in one way or the other way. And that is where we need to, look for. And that is why, in, with the NGOs, we need think tanks, we need people of opinion who can change the opinion of the people. When you have people around you who are hating you, even if the NGO is coming and giving me a food, it hardly matters. We need people who can address this issue of narrow nationalism. That's what I would say about it.
Yeah, and I must say that that is why my first question, started off with the majoritarian, nature of the country, right? So I will be speaking at a conference in December, taking place in Portugal, but unfortunately I'll be remotely participating in it. I would categorically be using the word religious nationalism and its use on the people on digital spaces and how they are using uh, you know, as a tool to attack minority groups. Thank you so much.
If you talk about, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
If you talk about the religious nationalism, you must talk about what's happening with the Muslim minorities, Muslim refugees in Europe, because that is the place everybody looks at as a standard of human rights, because this is how they have presented themselves, that they are the saviors of the human rights around the world, and they can just go to Iraq and bomb there because human rights are being violated, and they can just go to Afghanistan and invade it because human rights are being violated in there. But look at the situation in there. Look at, I would particularly, talk about the children, vulnerable children, refugee children who are in Europe right now, the Muslim children, Syrian and Iraqi refugees particularly. That is the religious, discrimination, the religious nationalism that they are facing through. They are from Iraq or Syria. For them, that is different. For the host community, they are the same. It
yeah,
doesn't matter where are you from.
absolutely. And even they dictate others, like the Muslim community specifically, on what dress you should wear on academic institutions.
Yes.
There was a case that took place. Sorry, again, I'm switching discussion. Which took place in an automobile company in Germany, I guess. Yeah. So a guy refused to uh, buy a car from a woman who was wearing a veil, and and then he instantly said that. I won't be discussing or interacting with this lady because she's wearing a veil and I don't like Muslims. And she took the owner of the automobile company and the person in the court. I mean, they both won it, but uh, the irony of that fell apart in woman's case, that okay, you do have a right whatever you wear, but the owner of the company also has a right whatever he wants to sell and whatever he wants to, you know, label as a representative of the of his company for that matter. So can you see the the limitations that they have applied when it comes to their own protective measures? So talk about protective measures. I have another question that that moves us to perhaps the close of this discussion. Do you think the legal frameworks or international policies? You did say that there are so many conventions in bullet points for stateless communities and are serving their purpose. I'm sure they're not. Is there a need for reforms to protect minorities who are forced to live in such a precarious situation? Are there any hopeful examples or successful example or good examples in this area?
Look, when we talk about international conventions and everything, in 1954 convention, I guess, yeah, in 1954 convention, it states that the states have to, it is designed that it will ensure, look at the wording, it's very interesting wording, it will ensure the minimum human rights, you know, the minimum set of human rights are offered to the stateless communities. Look at the wording. You know, if you are, whatever you are, anyone, you are a Geneva Convention, or you are whatever convention, or you refugee convention, or you are UN, or you are OIC, or whatever you are, if you are accepting that statelessness is a term that should be valid, and there are some certain people who can come under it, that is the first level of injustice, because nobody should be stateless. What is statelessness? What is statelessness? This land belongs to us all the humankind, all the people living in, one time on this earth. This land belongs to all of them. So what is statelessness? That is the first question that nobody wants to, why statelessness? Why statelessness should exist? Why should this term be endorsed? Okay, there are people who are stateless, and we will ensure the minimum human rights. The first human right is to belong to somewhere, right? Just like your life, your right to live, to education, your right to, you know, you not to go through the torture and all the rights that are given there. Right to belong to somewhere is a human right, right? So if you are okay about, tagging some people as stateless, okay, these are stateless, and we will ensure that they are given minimum human rights. That is the first level of injustice you are doing. So how can you expect people who are the perpetrators of injustice to provide justice later on? The laws that are being made, in the very wording of the law, there is hidden a silent injustice to the people. So how can we expect them to, serve the people? As I gave you example, all the laws are just there to serve the powerful. Yes, based on the statelessness and the laws around it, some communities are offering refugee status or asylum to the people. But if you look at the details, it is remarkable that you are only eligible for right to be a refugee, or right to have an asylum in the country where you first land, from the land of conflict. And that is making people who are going through the wars, right, wars and traumas, to take risk on their lives. I do not say all the people, come in this category, but there is a huge number of people who take the risk of being in the small boats, plastic boats, and go across the oceans, just to be somewhere that they can be eligible for an asylum. There is a big percentage of people who are going through the wars, and there is no way that they can leave the land and go somewhere else and ask for the asylum, ask for the refuge. These are the laws, right? So within the legal framework, there is a huge injustice that we don't talk about, because who will be talking about it? The people who made the laws. So why would they talk about it? and rest of the people who are the real victims of this whole legal framework, or the war scenario, and the industrial packages of war that are going around, and the people who are beneficiaries of the wars and refugee crisis and everything, they are not going to talk about it. And rest of the people, they don't have any voice. Even if they talk, they are just meaningless, just like we saw in the Palestinian war. For last 1 year, even in London, I see millions of people coming on the streets to protest against it. Did it make any difference? No, it didn't make any difference. So people are just helpless in this whole system that is implemented on the world right now. And as a human, as the whole human race, I would say we are all suffering in one way or the other. We need to look at the alternate system.
Yeah, this brings me to the most famous quote that there is an elephant in the room, so they don't talk about it, right? So I must agree, and thank you so much, Aisha, for walking us through your journey, how you got into this, the theme of statelessness. And I mean, you have told us remarkable stories because your work revolves around uh, legal and political dimensions, but also it has a human stories, the element of human stories of those who endure the trauma of being rendered invisible. For anyone who wants to learn more about Asha's work, when's is your story documentary coming out?
I'm trying to watch something really hard, inshallah. Let's see if hopefully in December next month. If not in December, maybe in January.
Okay, I'm not asking about its title, so I know I keep it till December. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. It was pleasure having you. I'll give you another 20 seconds for any message for the work that we are doing and the work that people needs to do to stop this element of hate.
Yeah, element of faith. That is something that we need to address. And we need to, as an individual person, like my work is all about individual because I do what I can do. I'm not associated to any big platforms. As an individual, we have to fight against hatred. First of all, within ourselves. The inbuilt, partiality is within us. And we have to look with our own eyes that who are the oppressed and who are the oppressors. The people who are being portrayed as oppressed and oppressors in the media and everywhere else, that can be totally false.
Thank you so much for your time. See you for another episode.